Hello everyone, myself Michael Ravina, Associate Professor, Department of Computer Science and Engineering. The subject is CS 3492 Database Management System. The unit is Advanced Topics and the topic is SQL Injection. SQL injection is one of the most common threats to the database system. We will discuss in it later in this section some of the other attacks on database that are quite frequent are unauthorized privilege escalation, privilege abuse, denial of service, weak authentication. First one is the unauthorized privilege escalation. That means this attack is characterized by individual attempting to elevate his or her privilege by attacking vulnerable points in the database system. Then second one is a privilege abuse. While the previous attack is done by the unauthorized user, this attack is performed by the privileged user. For example, an administrator who is allowed to change student information can use this privilege to update the student grade without instructor's permission. Then next one is the denial of service. Denial of service attack is an attempt to make resources unavailable to its intended user. It is a general attack category in which access to network application or data is denied to intended user by overflowing the buffer or consuming resources. Next one is a weak authentication. Weak authentication means if the user authentication scheme is weak, an attacker can impersonate the identity of a legitimate user by obtaining the login credentials. SQL injection method. In an SQL injection attack, the attacker injects a string input through the applications which changes or manipulated the SQL statement to the attacker's advantages. An SQL injection attack can harm the database in various ways such as unauthorized manipulation of the database or retrieval of sensitive data. It can be also be used to execute system level commands that may cause the system to deny service to the applications. The SQL manipulation attack is one of the common attack. The risk associated with the SQL injection are database fingerprinting, denial of service. Then next one is a bypassing authentication. Then identifying injectable parameters, executing remote commands, performing privilege escalation. The first risk is the database fingerprinting. That means the attacker can determine the type of database being used in the backend, so that can use the database specific attacks then correspond to the weakness in the particular DBMS. Denial of service means the attacker can flood the server with request, thus denying service to the valid user, or they can delete some data. Bypassing authentication. That means this is one of the most common risk in which the attacker can gain access to the database as an authorized user and perform all the desired tasks. Next one is the identifying injectable parameters. In this type of attack, the attacker gathers important information about the type and structure of the backend database of the web application. This attack is made possible by the fact and the default error page written by the application server is often overly descriptive. There are two types of commands. Next one is the executing a remote command. That means this provides attackers with a tool to execute arbitrary commands on the database. For example, a remote user can execute stored database procedure and functions from a remote SQL interactive interface. Performing privilege escalation. That means this type of attack takes advantages of logical flaws within the database to upgrade the access level. Next, protection technique against SQL injection. Protection against SQL injection attacks can be achieved by applying certain programming rules to all the programming web accessible procedures and functions. These are the bind variables. The use of bind variables known as parameters protects against injection attack and also improves the performance. Next one is the function security. The function security is the database function. Both standard and custom should be restricted and they can be explored in the SQL function injection attacks.